Good morning. It's 8 minutes after 10 on a Friday morning. You've reached the Real Estate Fix with, I'm your host, Rich Szerman on KHTS, AM 1220, FM 98.1, your hometown station. And thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate it. Today we've got a really good show today. It's going to be a lot of fun. My wife, Jane, is joining us. My wife and real estate attorney extraordinaire, Jane Sherman, is going to be joining us. And we're going to be talking about all things rental again. We did a show about a month ago about this, and it got some response. That's to put it mildly. We've gotten a lot of response from a lot of people, a lot of questions, which is perfectly reasonable given what a mess the current rental market is in Southern California, Los Angeles in particular. So we're going to be talking about that with Jane today. We're also going to do a little bit of some market stuff, and we're going to just basically go over some statistics and real estate situations, some kind of where we're at. But most of the day today is going to be talking about the rental market and landlords and what they're going through. Property providers, and you guys who listen to the show know I have a problem with that term. But anyway, landlords. And we're going to talk about tenants and all sorts of fun stuff. But let's start this off with kind of where the market's at. I always like to start every week with kind of where the market's at. Not a huge change. There is some good news. The interest rate went down a bit, which is nice. It's been going down consistently for the last couple of weeks, so that's really good. The problem is not going down enough. It's gone down a tiny bit. About an eighth of a point, maybe a quarter point. And that's a good thing, but for most people, I mean, if you're buying a $500,000 house, that's only about $100 a month. Now that's, or $80 a month, but that's something. I mean, it's a start. So maybe we'll have some good news as we get deeper into the holiday season, because hopefully, the Fed will not raise the interest rate at the next meeting. I still suspect they will, but there's been some economic news lately, particularly out of the jobs report, that tells us that they may not. And the interest rate seems to be coming back down a little bit. And as all of that is happening, the other piece of good news is that we are starting to see inventory come back to the market. Not nearly where it needs to be on either of those two things. The interest rate needs to get down below 6, preferably around 5.5, if not better. And we need to get a lot more houses on the market. But at least it's starting to thaw. The great real estate freeze is starting to thaw. And as evidence to that, here is a fun article I'd like to read you guys, just a little piece of. Sellers are doling out freebies to home buyers as sales stall and high mortgage rates freeze the housing market. This is according to Yahoo Finance, as originally in Business Insider. This is Wednesday of this week. And what they're talking about is this is nationwide. These are nationwide numbers they're talking about. This isn't Southern California, because prices here still stubbornly high, which is great if you own property, but horrible if you're looking to buy something. So I'll say it again. I say it every week. If you are looking to sell a house and you do not have something to buy, this is your market. But if you're selling a house and have to buy one, then maybe not, because you probably have a much lower interest rate on the house you're looking to buy than the one you're selling, than the one you're looking to buy. And because you have a low interest rate on your current house, that tends to keep a lot of people from buying the next house. The industry term for it these days is golden handcuffs, which I think is kind of interesting. But anyway, sellers are doling out freebies to home buyers as sales stall. More sellers resorted to doling out freebies as the U.S. housing market stalled. Sellers that gave concessions accounted for 35% of sales in the 3 months ending in October, surging from 27.6% of sales in October of 2021, per Redfin data. That's because owners were looking to get their homes off the market as high mortgage rates cooled off demand. So this is really largely October numbers. So this is people reacting to the news, really June and July, maybe August, as the market was starting to freeze and sellers dropped their prices. Now they start to get moving. According to Redfin, 16.3% of homes sales agreements were canceled in September. There's also an indication that demand is cooling because buyers are getting more picky. There are fewer houses on the market, so you wouldn't think buyers would be more picky. But given what buyers are having to pay with interest rates as high as they are, there are just fewer buyers in the market as well. So buyers are being more picky, and as a result, lots and lots of escrows are falling out. So 16.3% of home sales agreements in September nationwide, according to Redfin, were canceled. So those are people who got into escrow and said, nope, just kidding. Probably because they couldn't get a concession from a seller, or they couldn't work out a deal as to the condition of the property, or request for repairs, that kind of thing. Property listings nationwide have also spent a median of 50 days on the market in October, according to Realtor.com. That is the longest homes have been on the market in about 7 months. So houses are not selling as quickly either. And again, these are national numbers. Here in Southern California, the market's still going pretty strong as far as how quickly houses are selling and as far as prices. Of course, inventory is way down and interest rates are way up, so there's just far less of it. We're down about 40% overall as far as volume. So there is a recession going on in real estate right now, but it's not in a recession as far as pricing is concerned, as far as value is concerned. It's a recession as far as volume, the amount of properties being sold, and that crushes the real estate industry. Realtors, lenders, escrow people, title people, home inspectors, messengers, notaries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody who works out, as I do, in the real estate market, we are getting crushed this year because of just the lack of overall business for the reasons that we talked about. Now, one of the good pieces of good news is that bond yields have plunged, which has sent the mortgage rates tumbling. I wouldn't say tumbling is probably an overstatement, but they have gone down a bit. That's helped thaw the housing market. And on Wednesday of this week, data from the Mortgage Bankers Association showed that purchase activity and refinancing has increased. It kind of had to increase. It's the lowest it's been in 30 freaking years. So it is a good thing that it's increased. So anything is good at this point. None of these are great news. None of these are indicating huge market shifts or anything like that. But it is good news, and it does at least it's a glimmer of hope that we're moving in the right direction. So as I said, hopefully as things go on here through the second half of November and into December, maybe we will actually have a little bit of a Christmas miracle in the real estate market. Maybe the interest rate will actually go back down and we'll get some more houses on the market and all that other good stuff can unfreeze the market. Right. So, under that same heading, another article, according to NAR, from the good people at Newsweek. The U.S. housing markets, these are states where prices are falling, states and cities where prices are falling the fastest. The nationwide trend shows that home values are still climbing in most areas. However, the National Association of Realtors, a group that I've been a proud member for 30 plus years, 33 years, third quarter housing market report finds that there are a few cities, which we're going to go over, where the tides are turning and homes are becoming a bit more affordable. The prices are coming down. They are not crashing, but they are getting a little bit looser and they are getting a little bit better to work with. Nationally, the housing market remains resilient, with more than 80% of metro areas seeing price hikes. Los Angeles is there, pushing the median home cost to $406,900 nationwide, according to NAR. The wealth accumulation for homeowners since the pre-pandemic days is notable. NAR chief economist Lawrence Yun, who's always a good person to listen to, is usually on task. He's the head economist for the National Association of Realtors, so when Mr. Young speaks, it's a good idea to pay attention. But anyway, with typical homeowners seeing their net worth surge by over $100,000, that means the typical homeowner in the United States has seen the value of their property go up over $100,000. In Santa Clarita here, we've gone up about 24 to 27%, depending on which index you look at, since the pandemic, so the last really 2.5, 3 years. And while that's great if you own a house, it's horrible if you're looking to buy one. And unfortunately, more than anything, it is not sustainable. We cannot sustain 27% rise in prices with an interest rate over 7.5%, or I was touching 8 there for a while. That is not a sustainable situation. That is what bubbles are made of. We're all hoping that this doesn't pop like a bubble. We're all hoping that market starts to return to normal, the interest rates start to come back down. But it may very well do that. It may very well just pop, and it'll be awful if it happens, because it's certainly looking like that. But anyway, let's talk about some of these cities, because these are the cities in which prices are going down. Most of these are cities that boomed during the pandemic, so that's probably why. So you are seeing market corrections. Austin, Texas leads the pack. Austin, Texas has lost 10.3% year over year. They are now down to an average price of $485,700, which sounds great if you want to live in Austin, where our average sales price here is almost $900,000. It's $1 million for some areas of town. So $485 sounds pretty attractive, but they're down 10.3%. Honolulu, Hawaii is down 5.8% between now and this time last year. These are all year-over-year numbers. However, the average sales price for a house in Honolulu is still $1,061,900. So maybe not ready to move there unless you have the money. Jackson, Mississippi is down 4.8% to $234,000 on average. Shreveport, Louisiana is down 4.6% to an average of $210,000. Cape Coral, Florida, down 3.6%. St. George, Utah, down 3.6%. And my favorite, and this is number on our list, this is number 9, and this is mostly for my wife, Chico, California, home to Chico State, our alma mater. It's where she and I met. Fantastic school. Chico State is down 1.8% year over year. Average sales price up there now is $424,700. So if you want to live just south of Redding and sort of northwest of north of Sacramento, east, I suppose, of San Francisco, Chico's a great town. Not a whole lot goes on there besides the university. I think it's fantastic. But if you want to live there, $424,700 is now your average single-family home price in Chico, California, down 1.8% from this time last year. So, yeah, I don't remember what our mascot was. We're some sort of Wildcats, I think. Go Wildcats. Anyway, I even played sports for the school, didn't know the mascot. Anyway, right, so there's one other thing I want to touch on before we go to break, and before we get Jane in here to talk about this other stuff. And this is really kind of going to inform our conversation going forward for the rest of the day here. And I think this is important because, as we said, we're going to talk today about all things rental. It's going to be sort of, tenants and landlords beware, because what is going on in the state of California, in the city of Los Angeles, and the county of Los Angeles is insane. I don't know how else to put it. The state is grappling with a homelessness problem. I'll give you some statistics because these are burned into my memory. They should be burned into everybody's memory, in my view. California has 173,800 confirmed homeless. 173, almost 174,000 people who do not have a roof over their head tonight in this state. That's unacceptable. We're the 7th largest economy in the world. We have plenty of money in this state. We can do better than this. We just can't. The fact that we're not is embarrassing, and it should be embarrassing to all of us who live here. especially those of us who are in real estate. We need to do more about this. The problem is what? And unfortunately, the way that the state and the county and the cities are handling it, not so in Santa Clarita, we're doing a much better job in my view of this, is ridiculous. California has 12% of the entire U.S. population. 12% of the entire country lives here. But we have 30% of all of the U.S. homeless. We have 30% of the homeless and 12% of the population. We have almost 174,000 homeless people in this state. If that doesn't indicate, if that doesn't ring alarm bells for you, then you are not paying attention, because there are none of us that are not that far away from suffering this fate. I get people in the office all the time that are on the edge of homelessness, and any one of them could just, one more thing goes wrong, one more break in the ladder, one more tragedy, one more crisis, and they'll lose their homes. It's one of the reasons I do this sort of thing for free. It's one of the reasons we do foreclosure defense for free and all manner of real estate fixes and things pro bono. We reach out and help people all the time stay in their houses. This is in my wheelhouse, has been for 30 years. I've been trying to keep people in their homes. Pretty successfully, I might add. But here's some more statistics. In California, 56% of people own the home they live in. That is the lowest next to New York. So it's the second lowest in the entire country. Only 56% of people in California own the home they live in. Just to give you a comparison, the average in the rest of the United States is 65%. In a lot of states, particularly across the South, it's 75%. And that makes sense. 75% of people owning their homes, 25% renting is a ratio that would be workable. That makes sense. But 56% is not. And nationwide, this is the other big statistic I wanted to get down with you guys. We'll revisit this as well. But nationwide, 74.4% of rentals are owned by mom and pop landlords. That means people who own one or two houses. That's it. Whereas in California, only 46% of rentals in California are owned by mom and pops. That means we already have too much corporate ownership of rentals in this state. So, to review, massive homelessness problem in California. It is out of control. We have 12% of the U.S. population, 30% of the U.S. homeless. 56% of people in California own the home they live in, which means conversely that 44% do not. And the average in the United States is 65% ownership ratios. Some places a high 75%. And then nationwide, almost 75% of rentals are owned by mom and pops, which makes sense. It keeps the economy growing, middle class growing out and all. Whereas in California, only 46%. So we have too much corporate ownership of rentals in California, which is one of the things that poisons the well. We have, and this is really where the state and this county should be fighting, but they're not. They're coming after individual landlords in a way that makes no sense. They are doing more with corporate landlords and individuals, but Janet, you can talk about that as well when she comes in. But it is insane. Homelessness way out of control, not doing enough to curb prices and to deal with this. And now the state is telling individual landlords, well, these are the new rules. These weren't the rules when you bought the house. These weren't the rules when you rented the house. These weren't the rules when you put the current tenant in. But these are the rules now. And we're going to talk about them because they're maddening. I mean, the one that drives me the craziest is no-fault evictions. The idea that if you are a landlord, or as CR likes us to use the term, which I won't, property provider. I'm going to stick with landlord, thank you. If you're a landlord and you rent a property and the lease comes to its end, be a 1-year lease, 2-year lease, 10-year lease, whatever it is, if your lease is up and the tenant says, no, I like living here, I want to keep paying you and staying to live here. As the landlord, too bad. You are stuck. You cannot evict them under except very extreme circumstances, and you typically, if you do, have to pay them a ridiculous amount of money to move out. You may have to pay them as much as you've collected over the last 6 months in rent just to get them out of your house. And that's so you can move back into it. And what happens with all this stuff, same thing with deposits are now being affected. The state wants everybody to collect lower deposits. I'm all for making it easier for the tenants. I'm all for keeping people housed. The problem with all of this is when the state makes it more complicated and more expensive for the landlord, when the state pushes more of this onto, especially the mom and pop landlord, prices go up. And the mom and pop landlords who are still paying mortgages on a lot of these houses, et cetera, they have their own bills to pay. They're not corporate entities. They have bills to pay as well. So when their prices go up, when their costs go up, the price for the rental goes up. Not only that, when the state imposes these ridiculous rules, you got to be a lot more careful who you rent to. So that makes it harder to qualify. So again, in a state with a runaway homelessness problem, the state's version of fixing this by trying to push the responsibility onto the individual mom and pop landlord as well as corporate landlords will end in disaster. Because now what's happening is it has now become more difficult if you are a renter to rent in California. I've got clients in my office right now who I could have gotten them into a house and do a rental a year ago, no problem. Now, nope. Landlords don't rent to them. Credit scores below 620, 680. And that just depends on the landlord. But we used to take people with bad credit all the time. I thought of them as a better option, honestly. Somebody's got out of a bankruptcy, can't file bankruptcy again. Good person to rent to, in my view. Not anymore. Not anymore. because it is just too dangerous. And it could take you so long to evict them from a house. It could take 4, 5, 6 months to evict somebody, even for non-payment, which is a cause that you can still evict for. But yet you can only collect a 1-month deposit. 2 months was the rule before, and that was already too low. The state does this over and over and over again. They address the front end of the problem. They don't address the back end of the problem. And they just assume those of us in the middle will just scoop it up for them. And that's insane. And as evidence of this will be the last thing we cover before we go to break, and we'll bring in Jane. We'll stop ranting. Or maybe I'll rant more. You don't know. Anyway, LA County supervisors approve a 4% cap on rent increases. By the way, the statewide cap is 10%, which is much more reasonable. But in LA County, it's 4%, and that's up from 3%. And what kills me about this is they just had this vote this week or last week. What kills me about this is there are 5 supervisors that sit on the county supervisor board, LA County supervisor. One of them is a renter. The other 4 own. And Lindsay Horvath is the only one who's a renter. I'm sure she's a fine civic servant. But not surprisingly, she is in favor of every one of these crazy rental restrictions, every one of these crazy uber pro-tenant, anti-landlord things that comes down the pike. We were supposed to release this so that we could go to 8% in LA County as far as a raise in rents. I'm not saying you have to raise the rent like that if you're a landlord. I'm just saying it's there. And when the insurance costs going up and everything else going up, usually most landlords are up about 10% in their costs this year because of all the things that happen. So even 8% isn't going to get it, but 4% is ridiculous. So what I do have to do, I got to call out to Catherine Barger. She was great. She voted against the measure, and she said that as a stopgap policy that placed the burden onto mom and pop landlords who have been forced to pay more for insurance, home repairs, and energy costs while the rent they rely on has stagnated. She seems to be the only one of the 5 who gets it. And I think we're very lucky to have her representing us. I don't agree with her on a lot of things, but boy, I'm in her camp on this one because what we're doing with rental restrictions is insane. And how insane, you ask? Well, I tell you what, we're going to have Jane in after the break, and she'll talk about some specifics and kind of how to deal with some of this stuff. So why don't we go to break? We'll hear from some of the supervisors, let some of the ads roll. And by the way, remember, when you guys support one of the advertisers of the show and you support the people who support the show, you are supporting the show as well. So please support our advertisers. We would appreciate it. Let's hear from them. When we come back, we'll have Jan in. We'll talk some more about this craziness. Welcome back. You're listening to The Real Estate Fix with your host, Rich Szerman. That's me on KHTS 98.1 FM, AM 1220, your hometown station. And we're talking today about tenant and landlord issues because the state of California, in my view, has done some incredibly foolish things that will end in disaster as far as I'm concerned. And we were talking about homelessness in the state and kind of where we're at with it. And this is the number that just sticks with me. We have 12% of the U.S. population and 30% of the U.S. Homelessness. And that just shouldn't be. Almost 174,000 people homeless in in California. And we can do better than that. We just can. And what the state and the city and the county are doing is making it worse. And it is so confusing and so ridiculous, the new set of laws that everybody seems to be coming up with every time you turn around, that I thought probably a better idea to bring Jane in and ask her to explain to us, because, again, she's smarter than I am. She's also the one with the law degree. So I asked her to please, and she knows this stuff. She's been researching for a while, but I asked her to come in and talk to us about it because, near as I can tell, there are 3 levels you have to deal with. There's the state, there's the county, and then there's the various city if you're in a city that's incorporated. I used to be a city, you have to be incorporated. But anyway, so. Now, in some areas like Santa Clarita, we've been pretty free of this stuff. So it works a little bit, frankly, the market works a little bit better here for rentals than it does for other places. As tight as it is, it still works better here than down in LA. Because we have to deal with the statewide provisions, which are largely contained in, those of you who want to look this up, AB 1482.
Yeah.
And then there are some county provisions. But if you talk about other areas, like in our office, we're seeing a lot of people from the city of LA that are coming in. We get the same question all the time from landlords. How do I get it so I can sell my house? I don't want to have to pay, $30,000, $40,000 out of pocket to get the tenant who his lease is up to move. I just want to sell my house, and I don't want to be a landlord anymore because of all this craziness. So I figure by this time next year, just my own office personally, we'll see probably about a dozen properties that would have stayed rentals had the state not done this, that our landlords have said, I've had enough. I'm tapping out.
Yeah.
So there's 12 houses, single family homes, and that's just my little office. And there's, I'm just one little guy. But that's 12 houses we'll see personally that are no longer in the rental pool in the city of LA. And that's only going to get worse. So tell the people, if you would, we got a bunch of questions. You want to have questions? Do you want to do an overall?
Sure. Well,
a few questions? Okay. So we got a lot of questions. The website went a little crazy. There was a TikTok video I did on the same subject that blew up a lot, to put it mildly. So we got a lot of questions about this. That's why we're doing the show on this topic today. Why don't we just start here? We're talking about AB 1482. How do evictions work now under AB 1482? What did AB 1482? I know it's a lot. What are kind of the high points?
Yeah, it actually doesn't really. Impact the eviction directly. It impacts whether or not you can evict tenants largely. There are 2 main categories in it, which is the rent control, rent cap, provisions and just cause. The just cause provisions require that if you're covered by it, you as the landlord have to have just cause in order to evict the tenant. It's no longer okay to simply ask the tenant to move at the end of a lease or for no reason at all, which has been the law for many years, but you have to have just cause to do so. And if you follow those procedures, you have to give notice, you have to follow certain timelines, and only then can you evict the tenant. So there's going to be a great reduction in the number of instances where a tenant can be evicted because it's very limited.
Well, I understand this, the city, the states, the counties' desire to have it be more difficult to evict a tenant, but it's already pretty difficult to evict a tenant in Los Angeles County and incredibly time-consuming and expensive.
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, especially we're coming out of the pandemic, which was a whole different
Sure.
ball of wax there, and things were not allowed to proceed in eviction. But now at least they are.
I just give the listeners a bit of who aren't landlords who haven't had to do evictions, just some concept here. How long does it take? Let's say you're just a tenant has not paid rent for 60 days. And you go and you file an unlawful detainer action, which is the eviction, right?
Right.
And then, so you filed your unlawful detainer and you sent it to the court. The court has said, today it is filed. How long is it going to take from when it is filed, typically, to when you get somebody actually out?
First, I would highly recommend you don't wait 60 days if somebody is not paying your rent, especially in today's
Fair point.
environment, because actually somebody paying late rent is the only circumstance, or I shouldn't say the only, the
One of the few,
primary
yeah.
reason that you can actually, for fault, evict somebody. But so assuming you've got that filed with the court, it's still going to be a couple of months. It depends in part on a variety of things, like whether the tenant answers the court complaint, and so whether there's a contested matter or not, or whether it's being taken as a default. But realistically, it's still a minimum of a couple of months, especially by the time you would have to get the sheriffs out to perform an actual eviction of the property. But a couple of months out to 4 to 6 months, depending on the time periods, and sometimes you're at the mercy of the court.
So even as a default, meaning that the tenant is not contesting it. The tenant said, okay, fine, I didn't pay rent, I get it out. So you just get the order. You're still talking 2 to 3 months minimum to get them out of the property.
Yeah.
Unless they leave it on their own steam. And if they do answer the complaint and they say, you can't throw me out because, however ridiculous that reason is, even if the court finds against them, and most of the time the court does, in my experience, our experience, now you're talking 4 to 6 months.
Possibly. It might only add a little bit of time to it.
So
it sort of depends on, so, it could be less than a month it's adding, but there could be motions involved. And unfortunately, as you mentioned, we already have very tenant-leaning laws in this state. And I've been in court a number of times where, just contrary to black letter law, judges will bend over backwards to help the tenant and make a landlord start over or set a new date a couple of months out for another hearing. So that could certainly add a couple of months.
Elongated as well. So in other words, what the state has now done is they've said under AB 1482, Mishoff, no, this is the part I know, that you can now, I'm sorry, AB 12, pardon me, I got the wrong bill. Under AB 12, which passed 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
In that case, you're now only allowed to collect, if you're a corporate landlord, meaning you own, I think it's more than 2 houses, the definition for this. It used to be 4, but I think for this bill, it's 2 houses. So if you own more than 2 rental properties,
right,
you can now only collect a maximum of the equivalent of 1 month's rent. Prior to that, the law was, and it still is for individuals if you only own 1 house,
right,
it is 2 months' rent. But even an eviction where it's not contested, it goes as well as possible, is going to take you longer than that. And that's not even assuming any damage to the house.
Oh, Lord, and damage can really put that way over the top.
Yeah, it can be insane. So basically what happens, you are taking a massive risk as a landlord no matter what, and the state has just made it worse.
Yeah.
The state has basically set the circumstances out where being an individual landlord, while it is not impossible, it has just become much, much more difficult. So in a state that already has, mostly corporate landlords, whereas the rest of the United States have mostly mom and pop landlords, we are now making that situation worse because the only people who are going to be able to tolerate this are going to be corporate landlords. People already have, 40, 50, 60, 100, 200 properties, 200 doors as they call them in the business, units. So that's going to be left, and that's going to make it much, much worse for the tenants.
Yeah,
much worse.
Well, the landlords as well, the owners, the rental market, all of it. You have clients coming in your office and have for several years now,
sure,
because the homeowner is literally forced into foreclosure, or best case scenario, short sale where they have to get out from under it for less than is owed, simply because the tenant is not paying their rent, either through pandemic provisions or they're simply, because those are all out now. You can't, there's no more moratorium on eviction based on that. But yeah, but you have to Yeah, it's
Well, let me give you some basic stuff just for landlords out there. If you're a landlord, you used to be able to draft your own lease. Now, I don't recommend it. I think it's a bad idea. Obviously, I'm a realtor. You're an attorney. We have very, we use a very good
I
lease for
actually used
very
to
good
tell
reasons.
people that they could manage their own properties. I felt strongly, and
Yeah.
it's very expensive to get a
Yeah,
management
property
company, or
management.
it can be. But
Yeah, those days are
yeah,
essentially over. Because, for
yeah.
example, and we were just talking about this morning, so I'm going to say like I know this. I only know this audience because Jane taught me this. There is a disclosure now that has to be in every single lease in LA County, in California, actually, that if you fail to have that disclosure, now it's in all the California Association of Realtors leases, it's in there. But if you fail to have that disclosure in your lease, and if you've had the tenant there for 5 years and you're just month to month off a lease that's 5 years ago, you best update those disclosures. Because if this disclosure about relocation and tenants' rights, relocation costs and tenants' rights is not in your lease as an addendum, then your lease doesn't count. That means that
Yeah, well, the lease, the other provisions do count,
yeah.
but that's one of the problems here is that we do say frequently these are provisions that don't apply to single family homes and individual owners, which is great, except that there's that big caveat there that the notice has to be provided to the tenant about that fact, or it's not exempt. And properties now, anybody who's been in their property since July 1st, 2020, or I should say moved in after that time and started a tenancy after that time, has to have that provision in the lease, not an addendum, not somewhere else as far as I can tell, but in the lease, or it doesn't count, or you're subject to every single one of these rent cap provisions and just cause and all of it across the board. So if you are a landlord and you have a tenant that's a newer tenant in the last couple of years and you didn't use standard forms or realtor and you did your own lease, I can't recommend enough to you that you get a new lease prepared. Hopefully talk to a realtor, but at least use the proper forms and get a new lease sign that will include those provisions.
And by the way, those of you landlords who are out there who are listening and tenants as well, if your landlord presents you with an updated lease and you refuse to sign it, that is, I believe, one of the provisions that you can be escorted to the door. That is one of the at fault, which means the tenant did something wrong, where you can be evicted.
Yeah, and technically I think that's one of the ones that they specifically don't consider a major change. So that's why the tenant is required to, right, exactly.
Yeah.
As long as it's material the same, and that is considered material the same, the tenant has to sign it, but you got to know your rights going into that, or you won't get it done.
Sure, and keep in mind, I mean, we're not, both of us, we're usually on the side of the tenant in most of these matters. We really are. The two of us have spent like 30 years usually fighting on the side of the tenant. But this is just ridiculous. This has just gone way too far out of whack.
And this is as much on the side of the tenant because they need to know that. And if they're given an eviction notice and they don't have that in their lease, they have the right to challenge it.
It's going to come down to supply and demand. When you have fewer units available to rent in a market that already doesn't have enough rental property, they're going to get more expensive. And they're going to get more difficult to qualify for. So all of this nonsense that the state is taking, and the counties, the various cities, Pasadena, Santa Monica, Los Angeles especially, are trafficking in now, is going to make it worse for tenants. It will. Their efforts to fight homelessness is going to create more homelessness. You know, I can say this all the time, and those of you who know me have heard this a million times. I've been saying it for 30 years. I find that most government intervention like this kind of activist kind of stuff, are good ideas badly implemented. It is a good idea to stabilize the rental market. It is a good idea to keep rents down. It is a good idea to keep deposits down. I'm all for all of that. But if you only treat the front end of the problem, and you don't treat, like, for example, with evictions, if you say, well, you can only collect 1 month worth of rent right now because it's too hard to rent properties and it's too expensive to get into them. I'm down. I'm with you. But if you do nothing to address what it takes to evict somebody, the amount of time, money, and energy it takes to get somebody evicted when they don't make their rent payment, you're only treating the front end of the problem.
Yeah.
And that is what city councils and politicians tend to do. Not all, but they tend to treat the front end of the problem without looking at the problem all the way through. They treat, it's said all the time of government that if the government were truly in charge of the cure for polio, and there was no independent, Jonas Salk out there who did the work, the United States would have developed the best iron lung in the world, and we still wouldn't have a cure for polio. Because that's what politicians tend to do. They treat the symptom, not the disease. And that's just another example of this. Because this is complete nonsense. So let's go back to some of these questions. I need some of these answered for people. Okay, how about, got so many of these. How about, here, this is just what we were just talking about. If you're a landlord, do I need to tell tenants that relocation assistance is available?
Yes.
Yes.
So in addition to having the initial notice, regarding whether the tenant and the property are subject to a rent cap or just cause, if the property is subject to the provisions and the tenant is entitled to relocation fees, that notice must be provided to the tenant. And in fact, the money must be given to the tenant. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's within 15 days
yeah.
of the notice, which of course, given the length of the notice, is going to be well before they'd be moving out. So the landlord has to. Now, the good news there is
I didn't even put that together.
They can waive a month's rent in lieu of giving them cash, but it is the equivalent of 1 month's rent, either in a payment to the tenant within 15 days or written notice that their rent is waived ahead of time for a month. But if they don't do that within the 15 days, the notice is invalid.
And you have to start over again.
And you have to start over. So if you've given them a 60-day notice and don't realize that until the end, that's when you're starting over again as well.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Evictions and things these days, you used to be able to do it. It was always a chore, but you could do it yourself. You know, a little bit of research, you can give it a shot. But these days, you have to hire an attorney. You just do. There are too many landmines out there, especially in LA County. They're just too much.
And the rules keep changing.
And yeah, more importantly, they keep changing. It's completely and totally ridiculous. Let's talk a little bit more about what are the causes that you can evict for a landlord, because this is stuff tenants need to be wary about, and this is stuff that landlords who want to sell property are waiting to do. I mean, you and I, we've discussed it. We got a slew of them in the office now where we're all just waiting for the next shoe to drop. The first time that tenant's late on a rent payment, they're getting a 3-day notice and they're getting evicted.
Yeah.
The first time your lease says 2 pets and you have 3 and we can confirm it, you're getting evicted. Well, some of that stuff some areas you can't do for pets.
Yeah.
And if there's service animals, that gets in it. But my point is, now you've created this entire class of landlord who is just sitting there waiting for the tenant to make a mistake, to violate the lease so that they can evict them.
Yeah.
Rather than being able to just go to the tenant, hey, look, I'm selling the house, your lease is up, let me give you 30, 60, 90 days. We did one a couple of years, we give me a year notice. You know, this is what we're doing. I think I actually want to buy the house if memory serves the tenant. But anyway, rather than doing that, now you have to play this ridiculous game where you can't really be honest with your tenant if you're the landlord, and vice versa, and you just have to wait for that other shoe to drop. So let's talk about, tell the people what some of the just causes are for, what some of the just cause evictions, the at fault eviction part is. What are some of the reasons that a tenant can be evicted?
2 different things. So there's at fault, which is the obvious ones. Didn't pay rent. You've breached the lease in a material way.
Let me just interrupt. That also includes not paying rent on time.
Yes. But it's not that you can go back and say you've been paying rent late. It's if the tenant is late paying the rent on the day it's due, thereafter you can give them a 3-day notice to pay, but arguably with the new wording in the new rules, there's actually arguably most attorneys, if we're being conservative, there's sort of 2 notices that you have to give if it's a curable breach.
Of course there are.
So, I mean, the rent is more obvious, but if it's, say, you've got 3 dogs on the property and you weren't supposed to have any, that to me is fairly substantial. Or you're supposed to get insurance on the property, which we've seen before.
That comes up a lot, yeah.
So you kind of have to give them notice that it has to be done, formally written notice without a specific time frame, and then if they don't comply, then you can follow that up with a 3-day notice to quit. Although I would still recommend a notice to cure or quit, giving them that additional 3 days. So it gets very complicated, and you have to be strategic about it.
For those of you who are listening out there right now, and your eyes are just rolling because you have no idea what it is. Yeah, I'm with you. I do this all day, every day. So does Jane. I mean, luckily for me, I have Jane as a resource, and I can go to her at 8:00 at night and say, "What does this mean?"
Still makes my head hurt.
So that's a good thing. But not everyone has that. So if you guys are out there and you're hearing this and you're confused with what we're saying, and I know we've getting a lot of emails on this topic, please feel free to just call me or email me. I can be reached at 661-714-1400. We do not give out Jane's phone number on the air. We give out my phone number on the air. One is more than enough. 661-714-1400. That is my phone number. That's my personal cell phone number. I answer it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If I don't answer, please text me. I promise I will call you back. I always return my calls and my texts. It's kind of a thing with me. And if you have a question that I don't know the answer to, or one that needs an attorney, and again, point this out, you are always better off talking to an attorney. You are always better off getting legal advice from, in my case, Jane than me, because she's the one with a law degree, and she's being smarter than me and more well-studied than I am. She's the attorney. I'm just a realtor. So I seem to have to say that all the time with people. But although I sound like an attorney sometimes. Mom likes that, so that's cool. But yeah, always talk to the attorney. Always talk to the accountant. I tell people that all the time. Always talk to the expert. I'm a good gatekeeper for that, for getting you to the expert. But I tell you what, let's Jane, you'll hang in because where else be?
Sure.
I'm your ride. So you got to hang in. We'll go to break. We'll hear some more from the advertisers. Thank you guys for listening. I'm Rich. This is the Real Estate Fix on KHTS, FM 98.1, AM 1220, your hometown station. When we come back, we'll talk some more about some of this craziness in the California tenant and landlord relationship stuff. Thanks, guys. Welcome back, everybody. You've reached the Real Estate Fix. I'm your host, Rich Szerman, on KHTS 98.1 FM, AM 1220, your hometown station. I'm sitting here today with my lovely wife and real estate attorney extraordinaire, Jane Szerman. We've been talking about some of just the craziness that we're dealing with in the state and the county right now, having to do with landlord-tenant relationship stuff, because this is bad for everybody. This is bad for landlords, bad for tenants. When we went to break, we were talking about some of the reasons you can actually evict a tenant for, both to warn tenants, because if you trip any of these, a landlord's probably going to evict you, and for landlords, so you know what your rights are. So one of the biggest questions I want us to answer straight up, because we get this question all the time, is selling a property a just cause for eviction?
No.
So if you want to sell your house, even if the lease is up, tough.
Yeah.
Because leases in California now, especially in LA, doesn't matter. It could be a 1-year lease, could be a 4-year lease, could be a 16-minute lease. Doesn't really matter.
Well, assuming these provisions apply. And again, for the most part, single-family homes and condos owned by individuals are exempt as long as you provide the notices. Again, if you don't, you're going to be kicked right back under the provisions.
But even if you're an individual and you only own one house, you still can't say, I'd like to sell my house, your lease is up, please get out. You have to pay them a tremendous amount of money under that circumstance, and even then you have to have a reason to evict them.
Well, you can under the state laws. So like the county rules in Los Angeles apply to the unincorporated areas. So, for example, Santa Clarita is incorporated as a city, as we learned in the previous trivia. It was 1987?
Yeah, 1987,
See?
December 12th.
Right, I remember that.
I remember that day.
Anyway, so Santa Clarita is incorporated, so it is not subject to the provisions of the Los Angeles County rent control rules. It is subject to the state rules, but again, that is exempt for single-family homes and condos.
We'll have to drive.
There are more regulations. I hesitate because obviously that's not all of it. There, bureaucracy is involved here, but that's just a snapshot.
Yeah, I mean, I'll have the text right here of it from the state rule, AB 1482. Single-family homes and condominiums, the owner is not a real estate investment trust, not a corporation, and not a limited liability company in which at least one member is a corporation. They are exempt from the just cause eviction rules and rent control under AB 1482.
That's the relatively short way to say it.
Oh, that's the short version, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I had to read it like 5 times before I understood it. But okay, I got it. Okay, so let's talk about the other thing we hear all the time is when is a landlord actually allowed to raise the rent? And if so, and when, by how much? What is a landlord allowed to do? What should a tenant be looking for as far as when your lease cycle is up?
Well, two categories. For the category that's easier is if you are a single family home, you've provided the necessary disclosures to the tenant, you don't have a limit on the amount of rent that you can raise. That's unlimited. You can raise it whatever you want. However, anybody subject to these, the rent control rules under the state or the county or your individual city, we're just talking about the state right now.
Yeah,
sorry, that's too complicated. I don't want to go there. The state generally is 5% plus the CPI, which is the inflation essentially index.
Maxing out at 10, right?
Maxing at 10. Now, for a short period there, it was actually under 10%, but that's where I don't want to go into. Generally assume 10% is going to be your max in 12 months. And only twice during that time, weirdly. So you can't raise it 3 times, even if it's only 2% each time. It's twice during 12 months.
Why?
For a maximum of 10%.
Why?
I don't know.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Honestly,
and then also, as we talked about, that doesn't apply to LA County because now we just learned at the top of the show that was 3% increase maximum, and now they've generously gone to 4%.
Right,
and they're supposed to go to 8.
Exactly. So this is where, first of all, I'm not giving legal advice to any individual. Make that clear. I like to educate people on the laws because it's hard to figure out. But if you're an individual who has a property or a situation, you have to go look at the specific property, not just the city even, but the address. There are areas, I was looking up a client, I think it's Compton, that has both incorporated area, the city of Compton, and unincorporated areas of the city.
And if you're on one side of the street, you're in Compton City proper, and you're covered by that.
Everything is individual. You have to go look at it, and there are a million other individual small little rules we haven't mentioned here. So
I
It's,
think
yeah,
I think the bottom line is every problem there is a solution. It's just become harder to get to.
yeah,
So if you're a landlord and you want to sell a house, you can get there. It's just that much more difficult to get there. And it means you, in effect, have to not be as straightforward with your tenant as you would like. If you're a tenant, you
yeah,
got something on, it's the same sort of thing. So we've now created a situation where tenants and landlords are disincentivized from talking to each other
yeah,
because they are much better speaking to each other through counsel, which is unfortunate and expensive and ridiculous and will lead to far more problems than it will ever solve.
yeah,
And in my view, and I think the statistics are going to bear this out, it is going to increase homelessness in the state of California. You're making it more difficult for people to rent. You're making it more difficult for, I don't mean you personally, you're making it more difficult for landlords to be landlords. You're turning it over to corporates, to corporate landlords largely in a state that's already got a problem. And we're only making it worse. Everything about this is wrong-headed. Everything about this. If the state wants to get into the housing business, then come on down. Build some houses. Do all the rent control you want with those. Have at it. But to try to push this off on the individual landlords or even the corporate landlords is dumb. Not because it's bad for the landlord, which it is. It's bad for the tenant. It is bad for everybody. All of this stuff is not useful. It's just not. And I'm happy to debate that point. So those of you who want to tell me I'm wrong, feel free to give me a call. You can reach me anytime, 24 hours a day, 661-714-1400. But more importantly, those of you who are having a problem, whether you're a tenant, whether you're a landlord, wherever you are in this big mess, give me a call. I can point you in the right direction. And if I can't, Jane can. So just give us a call, 661-714-1400. That is my cell phone. You can reach me at that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Again, my name is Rich Szerman. You're listening to The Real Estate Fix with Rich Szerman on KHTS, 98.1 FM, AM 1220, your hometown station. And thank you guys for listening. I hope you learned something this week. I learned something studying for this week, and I thought I knew a lot about it, but Janie got me up to speed. So thank you guys for listening. Be good humans. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you next week.